journey, growing freely, no ceiling, no roof. Going deep with no stones to entangle my roots like they do.
Waking up tired and waiting for the horizon to appear. Remind me this work is all for love again. Looking ahead, I see hope in the sky. Give me access and I won't be denied. I won't let go, just hold tight to my hand. The world that we knew would return here. Living my dream without no fear.
Sure that will wipe away all tears.
I hate that my hands can't touch you. My arms are so hold to the memories and dreams. Know in my heart that I won't let go. Little beats every day, hard to beat, unafraid. Everything is not the same no more. Policies stay the same. They should be ashamed. They should try to hide their face. There is a light that I'm chasing in life. It won't be put out, thankful I'm alive. Ready or not, I will rise to a brighter day. A world without walls that divide. I'm grateful for all of the memories.
The International Festival of Arts and Ideas is created and produced on the traditional lands of the Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Schaghticoke, Golden Hill Paugussett, Niantic, and the Quinnipiac, in the land we all call home, Connecticut. We hope that from wherever you are, you take a moment to acknowledge and honor the native people whose land you are on and the history of the place you are in.
The International Festival of Arts and Ideas stands in solidarity with Black and Brown communities and other groups who are targeted and abused by unjust systems of oppression. We support all movements working to decenter white voices and dismantle white supremacy. We are actively seeking to dismantle systemic racism, and we raise our voices with those in our community who are already engaged in this vital work. We commit to working alongside you to create transformative change in New Haven and in our global community.
Hi, everybody. What's up? My name is Elizabeth Deering. I use she, her pronouns. I am the curator of ideas programs for this year's Festival of Arts and Ideas, the International Festival of Arts and Ideas. And this year is our year of Imagine. All of our programs are about imagining a future beyond our current systems, a future based on ancient, beautiful ways of being, lots of different ways of looking at our future. And it is my great pleasure to be here to welcome you all to tonight's events, Black Futures. And this event is going to be moderated by one of New Haven's greats, Mercy Quaye. Is the founder and president of the Narrative Project, Connecticut's only anti-racist public relations agency. She has built a storied career in journalism, communications, and public relations in New Haven and statewide for more than a decade. After working in the public and nonprofit sectors, spearheading communication strategies in a variety of industries, she launched the Narrative Project to offer high-quality communications for organizations who seek to do good in the world. After leaving a formal career in journalism, Mercy began working in mission-driven communications for public and nonprofit organizations, focusing on equitable education, undocumented students' rights, and more. She's also spent time working in public relations as the managing director of external affairs with Educators for Excellence, the director of communications with New Haven Public Schools, and as a communications associate with Connecticut Coalition for Achievement Now. At the core of everything she does is a deeply seated desire to affect positive social change through collaboration and highlighting lesser discussed aspects of the Black and American experiences. The daughter of a Ghanaian immigrant on one side and a first-generation college student on the other, Mercy's relationship to justice through storytelling and exposure was born shortly after moving from low-income housing in Newhallville to the West River neighborhood, a Westville adjacent community with the promise of opportunity, but far fewer resources than it required. A self-proclaimed inner city kid who went to college, Mercy's perspective on life has been shaped through a number of experiences, including converting from Christianity to Islam to agnosticism, joining a historically Black sorority at a predominantly white university, section hiking the Appalachian Trail, and having a brief stint in the outdoor industry. Having an oddly in-depth interest in astrophysics, being an interracial marriage with a former Wyomingite from a conservative family, and a convergence of countless other random happenings. She's a professor of digital journalism at Southern Connecticut State University and the vice president for communications at the Connecticut Society for Professional Journalists, and a columnist with Hearst Connecticut Media. Her column Subtext offers readers a lesser examined perspective on well-known topics and delves into the potential ripple effects of any given issue. She obtained a bachelor's in journalism and a master's in public relations, both from Quinnipiac University. And alongside Mercy, we are delighted and honored to welcome Alicia Garza. Alicia believes that Black communities deserve what all communities deserve, to be powerful in every aspect of their lives. An author, a political strategist, an organizer, and a cheeseburger enthusiast, Alicia founded the Black Futures Lab to make Black communities powerful in politics. In 2018, the Black Futures Lab conducted the Black Census Project, the largest survey of Black communities in over 150 years. Alicia is the co-creator of hashtag Black Lives Matter and the Black Lives Matter Global Network, an international organizing project to end state violence and oppression against Black people. The Black Lives Matter Global Network now has 40 chapters in 4 countries. She also serves as the strategy and partnerships director for the National Domestic Workers Alliance, which is the nation's premier voice for millions of domestic workers in the United States. Additionally, Alicia is the co-founder of Supermajority, a new home for women's activism. Alicia has become a powerful voice in the media and frequently contributes thoughtful opinion pieces and expert commentary on politics, race, gender, sexual orientation, and gender identity. Her work is featured in Time, MSNBC, The Washington Post, New York Times, The Guardian, Elle, and Essence. In addition, Alicia has received numerous accolades and recognitions, including being on the cover of Time's 100 Most Influential People in the World issue in September of 2020, named to Time's 100 Women of the Year list in March of 2020, Fortune's 40 Under 40, Fast Company's Queer 50 list, Politico 50, and 3-time recipient of the Roots list of 100 African-American achievers and influencers. Alicia has received the Sydney Peace Prize, Adweek Beacon Award, Glamour's Woman of the Year Award, Marie Claire's New Guard Award, and was honored as the community change agent at BET's Black Girls Rock Awards. Whew! Alicia's first book, The Purpose of Power, How We Come Together When We Fall Apart, released just this past October. I hope you all have it. With One World, Penguin Random House Publishing, and she shares her thoughts on politics and pop culture on her podcast, Lady Don't Take No. So without any further ado, I am so pumped for y'all to get to spend some time with Mercy and Alicia. Welcome, both of you. Enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm just excited, thrilled, honored to be able to share some virtual space with you, Alicia. Thank you for participating and for taking the next hour to talk about Black futures. It's been a hard day.
Yes, it
I
has.
think is fair to say.
Yes,
So,
acknowledge
you know,
it.
we have a we've got a list of topics that we're going to dive into, but I think that it would only be right to start off with some joy.
Yeah.
So let's take a couple moments to talk about what is bringing you joy right now.
Well, today is Friday, and that is bringing me a lot of joy this week. This week, honey, has just been like all the things, and I need a break. Even though we had a 3-day weekend, not brought to us by the federal government, but a holiday that we've been celebrating. It made this week feel even longer for some reason. So I'm really excited. It's Friday. I didn't cut nobody. I ain't hurt nobody. I ain't cuss nobody out. At least I don't think so. So that's
people should at you thanking you for that. They should at you thanking you.
And also, I've made some really good meals this week, and that is bringing me joy. I love cooking, but I'm sometimes like critical of my own cooking. And I made some meals this week that I was like, this is amazing. This looks so good. It tastes so good. And it did. It was like, yes.
What was it?
Oh, I made a corn and sausage pasta with like a Parmesan sauce that was amazing. And I also made a grilled skirt steak with pineapple chow that was out of this world. So I feel really good about that.
We're gonna have to connect about the recipe.
I know, right? I know. I put them on my Instagram, so I got you.
Awesome. So I'm just happy to start with a little bit of joy because it has been a difficult day with the sentencing of Derek Chauvin, and we're not even going to talk about that. What I will want to do is just kick off the conversation. We're here to talk about Black futures, and we're doing that with you. I don't know who better we could be spending our next hour with. So I want to set the groundwork with some history. Having co-founded the Black Lives Matter hashtag and the Black Lives Matter Global Network, can you tell me if the impetus you started all of this work under years ago still exists in your eyes? Ooh, Alicia, I think you're muted.
Sorry. For some reason my computer is going on and off mute by itself. So yes, I do feel like the same impetus that we created Black Lives Matter under is still present and real. I think there's always challenges, right? When something that you create goes viral or goes into the mainstream. I mean, there's definitely ways in which you lose critical components. But I think by and large, there are some things that are just embedded now that can't be taken away. So I'm feeling really good about that.
What are those things?
Well, for example, I think the unapologetic leadership of queer and trans people in this movement, I think, is undeniable. The unapologetic leadership of women and female identified people is undeniable. And the way that I know that is because we see people trying to usurp it and intervene in it. Talk a little mess right now because the trial's over and the sentencing's over, so I could talk all of the mess I want.
Let's do it.
I mean, I'll just say, right, we saw this with the Derek Chauvin trial and the subsequent kind of advocacy, right, for the Justice and Policing Act with the Floyd family. I found it really astounding that the advocacy that was being done at the White House was all the men and the male lawyers. And then where were the sisters, mothers, the sisters? They were all in Minneapolis, like bringing the community together, holding that big event. And I was looking at it and I said to myself, don't even be hot about this because it is so apparent. Before it was just assumed. right? It was just assumed, oh, this is just the way it should be. But I think actually this time it looked out of place and weird to have a bunch of men up there talking about this brother who had been killed and, you know, advocating on his behalf at the White House. But yet, you know, the sisters and all the other mothers of people who have been slain, murdered by police and vigilantes were all like doing the work of bringing people together. And they mentioned the fact, right, that they weren't in Washington, D.C., that they did not go to the White House, that they actually felt like they weren't going to be a talking point and a soundbite for people who ain't done nothing. And I really appreciate that. And I think that was a really good example of influence of this movement. And so I do think that the impetus is still there. I think people are still fighting it, but at least you can see the fight now and decide where you land.
Absolutely. I mean, and even when you think about, you know, coming from the world of journalism, right? Even when you think about the video that brought this case to light for everyone, the young woman who has been, you know, who took the video, who really elevated this to the stage, and the trauma that she's going to be experiencing for the rest of her life for being in that moment, right? She is as much of a part of this movement and as much of a spokesperson for this movement as any of the folks down in Washington talking about it. So I really do appreciate that perspective a great deal. Yeah. And also just a note that she's now won a Pulitzer too for that work.
That's right. She won an honorary Pulitzer Prize for her work, and I'm so glad she did.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk about the pace of change for a second, and knowing that the pace that you and so many others in the movement have set for us. I'm interested in knowing what you think the potential for that next phase of change is going to be, that the pace for the next phase of change in achieving a safe and prosperous and valued and protected and thriving Black future.
You know, the question of
I'll put as many commas in front of that, as many commas as we need to.
That's fair. That's fair. I think the question of pace is complicated. We are impatient. We are impatient, and rightfully so. We've been waiting a long time, and we've been fighting a long time. But with that being said, for me, the pace question is tricky because it really depends on time, place, and conditions. And some of those things you control, and some of those things you don't. And so maybe instead of pace, we can talk about components and ingredients for change. And I think that this next period is really about focusing on changing rules, changing institutions, alongside changing the culture that orients us around what those rules are supposed to be doing and what those institutions are supposed to be doing. And I think sometimes when we talk about and think about this movement, we think about it purely as a protest movement, which I think would be a mistake. I actually think that there are many different components to this movement, and some of them include policy change. And I think for those who have decided to kind of dive into that area of our movement, this is really your time to shine. We have some incredible opportunities on the landscape. We have changed the balance of power at the federal level. We are working hard to change the balance of power in states and in cities. And this is really where the rubber hits the road, right? Protests are the things I think that provide the glue between the change moments of the rules. And so now we are in a rule change moment. And I think it's important for us to dive into that. You know, I'm really surprised actually at how many of us, surprised, but not surprised. Concerned, I should say, but not surprised at how few of us actually know how rules become rules, actually know who makes rules, actually know how we can influence the people who make rules. And that is really important. I think if we have a long-term vision of what it means to run a society as opposed to be run inside of a society, then you do have to understand how those mechanisms work. That doesn't mean you have to become a part of the mechanisms, but if you are going to change or fight it, you need to know its anatomy and its DNA. And so I think that this is a moment for us to really dive into, how does government work? How does governance work? And how is it not working? And where are the interventions that we can make? And that's really the context, I think, that we're talking about in terms of voting rights, right? That's why it's important. It's not about Democrats or Republicans. It's about shifting the balance of power and removing people who are doing harm in our communities and installing people, right, who will do better. So that is what I think is a necessary ingredient in this recipe for change. And it's one that I think needs a little seasoning and a little spice. And just in general, a little highlighting.
Look, I'm gonna be just fine if we keep coming back to some food references. I'll be okay.
Well done.
No,
well
but
done.
I hear that and I love that, and I think it actually sets up pretty wonderfully for next topic that I want to dive into, because when we talk about the piece of change, one of the things that we know that our society, our government, elected officials, leaders in general like to do is, well, we've made it so far from X, Y, and Z, and now we have, we have Black History Month, and we made MLK Day a holiday, and well, okay, how about now we do Juneteenth, right? And so when we talk about the pace of change, oftentimes our country conflates, tacit recognition with actual and true progress. So all the while denying things like critical race theory in the same breath, right? And so what to you are the lessons we need to know, and what are the lessons that teaches us about navigating this frequent argument about progress over perfection?
Yeah, well, let me start with this. I don't think progress is about pace. I think it's about substance. And one thing that I'll just kind of keep harping on here is we can get symbols really quickly. Juneteenth is a great example of that, right? I've been celebrating Juneteenth for at least 15 years.
Right.
And having it designated as a federal holiday is important, but not as important to me as like making Election Day a federal holiday, so people could actually vote and
take the day off to participate in our system.
Right. I mean, the whole thing. But also, right, like we got, there is this now infamous photo of like congressional leaders doing the Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, wearing kente cloth from who knows where, honey, because we didn't get that memo. And yet we still don't have police reform.
Right.
That was fast. That was just last year, if you can believe it. It was fast, but it doesn't produce quality content or substance. And so in this era where everything is instant gratification, I want us to be careful of that inside of politics, because politics right now is deeply transactional. And so if we're constantly focused on like, why haven't things changed yet? We don't really focus on what kind of change and where does that get us in the long run? So maybe it's better actually for there to be a protracted struggle, so that on the other side of it, we actually know what we won, what we didn't win, what we're still fighting for, what we've accomplished on all of that. I'll also say that, for me, I really want for us to get clear about what it is that we are really fighting for. And this goes back to this like symbol versus substance thing, but I've been thinking about this a lot lately. And I myself even am trying to be careful about being satisfied with symbolic victories. Now, let me be clear when I say this. We should celebrate every win that we get, because they come few and far between.
Mhm.
So Juneteenth being a
Mhm.
federal holiday is actually a victory of some sort, right? It's not the ultimate thing that we want, but there's some good in it. If nothing else, you know, we don't have to play hooky. We can actually say, oh, this
Because
is
we was
actually
doing it.
for everybody, right? Um, but with that being said, I'm thinking about, the vice president. And I'm thinking about her comments about immigration reform when she was in Guatemala a couple of weeks ago. I'm thinking about the president, right, who just this week made a speech about how he is directing states that they can now use the $350 billion of stimulus money that he sent to states um, for hiring more police officers. Oh, yeah. And then for community programs. But really the emphasis here is on bolstering law enforcement. So, I feel like what we need to be able to do here is walk and chew gum at the same time. And by that, what I mean is we need to hold the administration's feet to the fire. We need to hold local and state elected officials. We need to hold their feet to the fire. My understanding is that for many states, mayors and governors aren't releasing monies that they could be releasing to provide relief in people's everyday lives. And those are substance-based changes that we can still fight for. And I don't care if your mayor is Black. I don't care if your mayor is white. I don't care if your mayor is Asian. If they are standing in the way of moving that money so that your life can be better, then that's a problem. And it's a problem we have to fix. So I'm sitting with that. I'm sitting with that a bunch. And I guess I also just lastly here will say that for me, in terms of this question of pace, in terms of this question of, progress and pace, we have come very far and we still have a long way to go. And we need to be able to hold those things in tension with each other, but also as a full picture, as opposed to an overemphasis on one or the other. And a lot of this for me really depends on what do you see as the end goal, right? I hear people talking a lot about like revolution is the end goal. And I'm like, well, revolution is a process. It's not a destination. It's an ongoing engagement, right? Of rebuilding and reimagining new societies, new economies, new democracies. So if your destination is process, right, then you have to evaluate progress from that perspective. If your destination is something else that's more fixed, well, then, yeah, you can be a little bit more clear about, are we ahead of the game or are we behind the game? Because the goalpost isn't moving. And I think with this kind of work, this work of social change, there's no endpoint, right? There's no endpoint. Even if we were to dismantle all the things we want to dismantle, there's still the process of building that we have to be engaged in. And that is a process that will live long beyond us if we do our jobs right.
Yeah, and what I love about this is that for me, particularly in the work that we do at the Narrative Project, right, when we talk about anti-racist work, particularly anti-racist communications, anti-racist storytelling, anti-racist public relations, what it is a consistent and persistent interrogation of your first thought, your second thought, and in the context of society. And so, right, it's a process. It is not a destination. It is a journey. We've understood that as, a common refrain of the movement. And it's also one of those things that you can't get stagnant because there's always something that we have to be vigilant about, seeing what is out to harm us, what is out to, devalue Blackness, what is out to threaten the Black future in general. And that's a constant interrogation of the systems around us. And so, I love the way that you frame that, because I really do think it puts in perspective that, right, there isn't a calm in this, and there always has to be a reassessing of what the next phase is.
That's right. That's right.
So talking about the work that talking about work and the work that people do with organizations, what we see even at a corporate level is hollow gestures and, like you said, symbols, right? We can get symbols real quick. So I would love for you to talk to me a bit about what the role businesses and companies play in actually shifting narratives when it comes to furthering the understanding of the need to discuss race, right? To be comfortable with race, and to adopt pro-Black, anti-racist values at the organizational level.
You know, I get asked this question a lot, and it's hard for me because I'm not a corporate leader. I don't run corporations. I don't work inside a corporation. I mean, I do, but it's a nonprofit, and so it's a little bit of a different context. But let me say this. I mean, I do run a workplace, and our values have to match. Our values externally have to match what we do internally. And if there is a gap there, we're failing. You know, I just, for example, in my organization, just did a whole revamping of our salary scale, right? Because here we are advocating for economic justice out in the world and with Black folks. But I was like, oh, are the people who I employ getting paid properly for the work that they're doing? Is there exorbitant resources at the top and not enough resources at the bottom? And we actually have had to have this conversation, right? My salary scale is about 3.5 to 1, right? Which means that the highest paid person in the organization doesn't make any more than 3 times the amount of the lowest paid person in the organization, which ultimately benefits the lowest paid person in the organization. Right. That is the thing that we, it's an example, right, of how we match our values to our practices. And I think it's really easy for people, particularly corporate leaders and corporate entities, to kind of make these statements out in the world about what people should be doing, but not actually follow that in their own realms. And a lot of that has to do with the incentive structure for corporations, which is profit driven. It's not people driven. And in as much as there are or is people driven work, it doesn't if it doesn't impact the bottom line, companies are more likely to do it. If it does impact the bottom line, they're less likely to do it. And that has everything to do with the way that they're structured and also the way that they're led and who's leading them. Now, with that being said, there are Black people who lead companies that are predatory. So again, with the conversation about symbol over substance, we have to be mindful. But I think there are some corporate entities out there that do want to do the right thing. And I have said, and I'll say it again, I don't think it's rocket science. I think that all it takes is a real commitment and some courage to actually do the right thing. And the right thing is making sure that there is equity inside of your institution as well as equity outside of your institution. And you do have to have an honest accounting of the impact that you actually have in the world, right? My organization works to make Black communities powerful in politics so that we can be powerful in the rest of our lives. I don't sell a product, right? And my bottom line is not about what I can sell and what I can't sell and how cheaply I can sell it and how much money I can make off of how cheaply I can sell a thing. And so if you're not willing to have that kind of honest conversation inside of an entity, then don't fake it. That's how I feel. I feel like we should just be authentic about the things we're for and the things that we're not for. And you can smell it, right? When a company says they're for a thing, but they don't really act that way in the world. Like when I hear, Twitter talking about, we connect people, I'm like, yeah, you do, but you don't protect people on your platforms. If you really care about connecting people, then you would also really care about protecting people like me who get harassed, who get death threats on this platform. And there's basically nothing I can do except grin and bear it. Same with Facebook. Facebook, I would say, is even more egregious because they engage heavily in politics and the political realm. And Facebook talks about itself as a global community, and yet it doesn't build global community. So that's the thing that I think we've got to be mindful of here. And that's what I think corporations need to be doing, is just being honest about the footprint and the impact they have in the world, not just in terms of profit or reach, but in terms of social impact as well.
Right. Do you think that, right? I mean, I want corporations to wear their heart on their sleeves, no matter how cold-blooded how cold the blood is that's pumping through that heart. Wear it on your sleeves. Do you think that society will do the thing that we hope it would do, right? To sort of vote with your dollars in order to support agencies and corporations that have thought thoroughly about their social impact, and then we'll see corporations that don't care sort of subside, whether that is by the fact of, I'm not going to work there and I'm not going to put my money there in any other way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, look. I can go on and on about corporate responsibility, and I think there's also a contradiction and a reality for some of our folks that some of our people work in these corporations, and it's what pays their kids college tuition, and it's what pays their rent. And there's no shade here. Like, look, I didn't design this economy. You didn't design this economy. We all live inside of it. So please don't take this as any kind of shade if you are a corporate worker. But it is to say that if you are a corporate worker, just don't drink the Kool-Aid. Don't drink the Kool-Aid, right? Like, I know people who work at Facebook, for example, who know good and goddamn well that company does terrible things in the world. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, you know it.
Right.
But yeah, like, I can be engaged in a conversation with them about the death threats that I get on that platform, and how people use that platform to, usurp my personal information against my will. And they're selling me back the company line. And I'm looking at them like, I mean, we know each other though. And, you can't have it both ways. So if you work at a company that's terrible in the world, just be honest about that. Just be honest about that.
You wear that on your sleeve too.
Right? Yeah, like say it. Like, I work at one of the most evil corporations in the world. And then it's like, okay, now I feel like we're on solid ground. And I'm not telling you to blow up your own spot, but I am saying don't try to sell me the Kool-Aid. You know what I mean? Don't try to sell it to me. So that's the bare minimum. If you know you work at an evil place, do all of us a favor and just even tacitly acknowledge, like, yeah, no, it's not the greatest actor. Second thing, though, is that I know lots of people who work in devilish corporations who have used it as an opportunity to organize from the inside. So there is courage, and there are courageous actions that can be taken in coordination and collaboration with other people. You cannot be fired for organizing legally. And if you are, it's a good story to tell, right? If you can't take that risk, though, there's lots of other things that you can do. You can participate quietly in efforts and institutions that are working to make this world more fair. You can give money to organizations that are working to make this world more fair. You can, use your voice internally and try to make sure it doesn't get out externally, but know that there's pressure from the inside. You can leak information, right? To, let's talk about this kind of stuff. Like, the only way we've ever learned about the corruption inside of these entities is when courageous people decide they're not going to be silent. So if you're going to use Dr. Martin Luther King quotes, you know what I mean, then please do what he did too.
Oh my gosh. That's going to be my new MLK quote. I love that. And just to stay on the topic of companies, because in our capitalistic society, we know that the direction that companies move in tends to be the direction that capital moves in, and as such, the direction that government starts to move in. And so being in public relations and a storyteller myself, I love seeing things like companies throw weight around. I really enjoyed that. It was like, yep, me and my 13 billion, we feel this way. And you know, I snooped around. I looked at your Instagram and your Twitter recently, and I saw that you shouted out Gushers for their comments a year ago during the George Floyd situation. And for me, I'm just interested for you. What did they do right, and what can other companies learn from their statement? I think your computer did it again, sis.
I hate this thing so much. Okay. Good thing I wasn't like going off. One thing they did is they acknowledged who their customer base was, which I thought was really interesting. You know, there's stuff that Black folks love, and Gushers is one of those things.
One thing about Black folks.
When it comes to our sweets, honey, we serious. Now and laters, Gushers, you know, we have things that we consume. And so I thought it was important that they acknowledged that as they were making their statement. And I meant to follow up to see what they were actually up to. But it is to say that actually sometimes statements do matter, right? Sometimes statements do matter. Sometimes it does matter when an entity acknowledges, like, if it wasn't for y'all, we wouldn't be here, right? Like, sometimes that does matter. And then talking about the things that your audience cares about, talking about the things that your supporters care about is important. It shows a level of connectedness and rootedness. Now, with that being said, we know also from the news cycle that there were lots of commitments that were made in this last year from corporate entities that didn't come true. And I think it's important for folk to be asking these questions. Okay, so what did Gushers actually do? Okay, well, so-and-so announced they were going to do this fund. Did any of that money actually get released? There's a bunch of companies. There's a lot of companies that announced a lot of things, like, you know, companies like PayPal, right? That said they were going to do all stuff. And I don't think they've released any money. So it's good to go back, especially if you're a consumer of those platforms. You do have power in relationship to that. So that's something I would encourage us to keep in mind.
Absolutely. And it's just one of those things. I mean, for folks listening, if anyone wants to start this nonprofit, right, a corporate watchdog of, you know, how do we hold agencies and organizations accountable for the commitments they make to historically and traditionally underserved communities, right? Because it could be billions on the line in commitments that aren't being allocated or adequately used or leveraged in impacted communities. But that company got the credit for making that statement. And that's what happens a lot. They get the credit.
That's right. Well, they got your hard-earned money too, but they didn't invest in the very communities that support them. And so when I think about communities that are have schools that lack books, when I think about communities that have schools that don't have computers for every student, I think about the corporations that prey on those communities, or at the very least make profit off of those communities. And I wonder why it is that they don't see it necessary to reinvest in the communities that invest in them. So it is important to put that on the table, and it's important to make sure that these companies understand that their reputations are on the line.
Okay, so I'm gonna leave companies alone for a little bit. I'll come back on my Twitter and talk about it a little more. But you know, being that today, you know, was the sentencing of the Derek Chauvin case. One of the topics that we were going to discuss was the murder of George Floyd last year. And I'm exhausted, right? I know you're exhausted. And I've been calling last year the tumultuous summer. I'm not going to call it, a racial revelation, because that I think is a bit dishonest to the experiences of folks who have known and have always known, right, the impact of racism in our society. But I've been calling it a tumultuous summer because everyone from individuals to elected officials, teachers, companies, schools, right, you name it, mobilized to do something, right? But here we are, we're just a year over the initial incident. And I'm interested in, from you, can you tell me what you think our next point of action should be? And where and how should we continue to apply pressure?
I think the most critical places of action in this next period are around the culture wars that are being fought right now and around policy. And, you know, I was having a conversation this morning with a dear sister of mine, and we were talking about the fact that if you look historically, every time we have won something major, voting rights, civil rights, you know, gender rights, right, that there has been an equal and opposite backlash. And part of how that backlash occurs is by attacking the values beneath the rules. So this is where we see, you know, all kinds of battles around cancel culture and critical race. It's like actually not about any of that stuff. It's actually about whether or not we should be a racist country. And, you know, that is the war that is being waged right now. And when it comes to, you know, the fight around trans people playing sports or trans people being able to use bathrooms, it's like not about any of that stuff. It's actually about, right, whether or not white, male, cis, hetero, Christian values, rules, and objectives are going to run this country or not. So they are fighting to take us way back, and we are fighting to push us way forward. And that is the challenge here. And so we've got to be able to boil that down into simpler terms, because critical race theory is not actually what's at stake here. And people get real in the weeds about this and get real academic about it, right? They're like, oh, critical race theory is necessary because we teach it in the schools. It's not about any of that. It's about helping people understand the racist origins of this country so that we can not keep doing it. That's the basic piece of it. Even people in the academy don't totally understand what critical race theory is, right? The battleground. The battleground has to be, what side are you on? Are you on the side of keeping America a racist country? Or are you on the side of dismantling racism in this country? That's it. That's it. And people try to take it to a whole bunch of other levels, but honey, it's just one level. And it's a very basic level.
Let's keep it real simple.
You know, it's like there's no such thing as cancel culture. Like literally there's no such thing. People who have power socially, economically, you know, don't face consequences for the things that they do. They just don't. They just don't. Like I turned on CNN the other day and I saw a man who whipped out his penis on a Zoom call with his coworkers, right? He still has a job and he's getting paid really well. Nobody blinked an eye. In fact, they were welcoming him back and telling him how much they missed him, right? So there's no such thing as cancel culture, okay? Again, what they are lamenting is the cancellation of racism, of xenophobia, of homophobia, of transphobia, right? They're lamenting the changing of the values that are ultimately going to change the rules that govern this society. So I think we have to be focused on making sure we stay focused in that. Don't get derailed along a bunch of all these other lines. And if you feel like you're starting to get derailed, get off Twitter and like talk to regular people about how they understand what is going on and what's at stake. And I think it'll help. So that's a realm I think we have to dive into. The other thing I think we have to really do here is pay attention to the rules and who's making them, who's defending them, and who's committed to changing them. You know, a lot of people have jobs right now that shouldn't.
Right.
A lot of people have jobs right now that shouldn't. I don't know why Joe Manchin has a job. I don't know why Kristen Sinema has a job. But you know what? We could change that if we stay focused. If we stop doing it's like, I told you Joe Biden wasn't going to be nothing. I'm like, listen, this is not how this goes. That's not how this works. you don't participate because these are people that you want to like kick it with, or you want to invite them over for dinner. That's not the point of this. The point is who's going to move your agenda.
Right.
I guarantee people will start to hop to it when they start to realize there's consequences for them not moving your agenda. But as long as there's no consequences for them not moving your agenda, you can't expect much from these people. So that's the other piece that I think is really important. And alongside of that, because that's really electoral, we're talking about policy. I think a lot more of us have to get literate in that language. And I'm not talking about being policy wonks. What I'm talking about is the language of rules and how we should be organized, how resources should be distributed and how they should not. How rules become rules, right? Like these are things that are important for us to take seriously. If we are serious about social change, we have to be serious about studying the mechanisms of how all this stuff works so that we can be more strategic in our attempts to build something better and to remove the harm that exists right now.
It's at the root of, I think, the work that you're doing at Black Futures Lab, building power. And there is a way to do that on the ground level, organizing communities. And there's a way to do that in the legislative fields, right? And what we see all the time is that we get discouraged, right? To quote a brother who does some phenomenal work here in New Haven, Eric Clements, he says, you can't build and fight at the same time. And so a lot of times our communities get discouraged. So what's the entry point when we talk about building power?
I don't know that I agree that you can't build and fight at the same time. So let me give an example.
I love to hear it. Let's hear it.
Yeah. So in my community, just last night, actually, the community won a huge victory. Folks who have been engaged in the budget fight here in Oakland. And just to give an example, Oakland, California, we spend 40% of our general budget on policing and police services, 40%. Meanwhile, our schools don't have the things we need. We have massive tent cities across the city. Housing is more expensive in Oakland than it is in San Francisco and New York, right? I mean, we are really facing a lot of crises here. And if it were true that you can't build while you fight, then we wouldn't have places like Oakland. So I'll tell you a little bit about what happened last night. Last night, the city council voted to refund our community $18 million from policing into much needed community services, mental health supports, job training programs, right? Crisis intervention supports, right? And that work actually was about fighting and building. It was about running people for positions of leadership and winning. It was about getting those people on the same page about what the priorities were. So this became important and useful and actually possible because we organized the city council. And we have now a progressive majority on the city council. And without that, right, we wouldn't have had the ability to build something new. But we had to fight for it, honey. We had to fight for it. And so I think the thing that we should consider possibly instead is that you can't just be focused on fighting. You also have to be focused on building. And what keeps people in a fight, right, is their vision for what's possible. And not enough of us invest in the vision of what's possible. Most of us stay in the place of what's not working. So if there was any place where I would agree, I would say it's maybe both and not an either or.
Either or.
I also will just add here that, for me in the Black Futures Lab, we spend a lot of time articulating what is possible so that we can build those muscles in our communities. We found through our Black Census Project that Most of the people who answered our survey, which is the largest survey of Black people in America in 156 years, most of the people we talked to said, nobody has ever asked me what I experience every day or what I want for my future. And you can imagine that doesn't bode well for building a new society. So our mandate as the lab and as the Action Fund is we are constantly in communication with our people about what we're trying to build. We've put out agendas, right, that talk about how it is that we legislatively make Black Lives Matter from City Hall to Congress, because we want to energize our communities to keep thinking about, if not this, then what, right? The conversation, for example, around policing is a really good one. It's not that our communities love the police. They don't. They don't. Like if you talk to Big Mama, right? Big Mama will tell you like, you know, we need police because people are acting crazy in our communities. But she will also tell you, I don't like how police act in my community, right? But without the other side of that, which is, okay, if not them, then what? Then she's always going to stay in that place of like, well, we need them because if we don't have them, then, you know, everything's going to get chaotic. Well, what if that's not really true? And if it's not really true, what she's going to say, well, what else are you going to do? Who's going to do it? I don't know if anybody's watching The Chi right now. Anybody?
It's so good. It's so good. It's so
good. It's so good. And usually I don't like storylines like this because I feel like nobody does activism right. But what I love about this season is they actually really get into this question of like, okay, well, what would you do? So you got the mayor to say, we're defunding the police, right? We're dismantling them, we're defunding them. And then they have to struggle with this question of like, okay, well, how do we protect people? We know what they're going to do is they're going to try and paint this like, without them, there was absolute mayhem and chaos. So we can't allow that to happen. So now we've got to organize ourselves to take care of our own needs. And I think it's a really good pop culture example of the real work that has to be done in our communities. I don't know that it would look exactly like what they're doing over there in The Chi, but I do think that it raises the important questions that we need to be considering.
Yeah, and the only, I mean, beautifully said, I don't have to add anything to that. The only thing that I'll say about The Chi is that, you know, if anyone's looking for some responsible storytelling, particularly as it pertains to the inclusion of police storylines without being police propaganda, The Chi is a really great show that you could pick up. So I really appreciate you dropping that. I think in wrapping up, I want to dive into the Black future. And I want to give some time and some consideration to it, some serious consideration to it. What for you, do you think is the biggest threat to a prosperous Black future?
Amnesia.
I think we had amnesia.
Biggest threat to a prosperous Black future. So one of the things that is really interesting to me is that we've seen all the things that we're dealing with right now, we've seen them before. They follow very predictable patterns. And I've been spending a lot of time kind of looking at the first period of Reconstruction in this country. And it's fascinating what the parallels are, right? It's fascinating to look at, you know, all of the things that were able to be initiated in that moment. In terms of freedmen's bureaus, in terms of suffrage for Black men, in terms of, you know, land redistribution, in terms of, you know, contract negotiation and actually being paid for your labor. I mean, these were like huge advances, right? And then the correlation between protecting people so that they could participate in society is actually fascinating to me.
Right.
But then there was a subsequent and simultaneous backlash, right? That looked a lot like what we're seeing right now. And I think part of the problem is that we tell ahistorical narratives on purpose. We talk about social change in ways that it doesn't actually happen. So, and I talk about this in my book, right? We talk about, you know, what if we actually heard that Rosa Parks was a longtime community organizer, rather than she was a seamstress who was too tired to go to the back of the bus one day? What if we actually told the story that the first person to be courageous enough to refuse segregation on public transportation was a young, pregnant Claudette Colvin, right? What if we told history accurately?
What if?
And what would that do for our future? How would it impact how we imagine what's possible? And I think that ahistorical narratives are not on accident. They're on purpose. And the purpose is to sanitize them. The purpose is to take the risk out of them. And the purpose is to actually defang the impact of the actions. Martin Luther King gets boiled down to nonviolence, right? As opposed to having a radical vision for a redistribution of resources and power in this country. Malcolm X gets boiled down to a petty criminal who found God, right? As opposed to one of the most prolific leaders of our time, who actually envisioned a global movement, not just of Black people, right? But a global, like multiracial, multinational movement. What if, right? Those were the stories that we told. And what are the consequences of not telling the right stories? So I think the biggest threat to a Black future is amnesia. And I will say, especially for Black people. So we also tell ahistorical narratives. We valorize things that actually are very nuanced and complicated. We act as if these things that we inherited are our birthrights, right? We talk about our people as if we ourselves are monoliths, as opposed to a complex and rich diaspora. And that does us no favors in terms of reimagining our futures. So that is what I think is the biggest threat to a prosperous, full, and dignified Black future.
Yeah. And I think that one of those pieces of an ahistorical narrative that I'm really worried about, Alicia, is Juneteenth right now, right? I'm worried, and I've been talking about this for 2 weeks now, that what'll happen in the retelling of Juneteenth is that the Union soldiers worked tirelessly to make sure that every person, every Black person in our nation knew of their freedom. That wasn't the case. They had to, lots of times, right? These folks were denied their freedom. It wasn't that they didn't know. They were denied. Juneteenth is a story of delayed justice. So I really appreciate that framing of that narrative, because I think ahistorical narratives stand in our way. And as you say, amnesia being a threat to a prosperous Black future, what I'm interested in knowing as we close is, what can Black folks and non-Black folks alike do to work to combat that threat?
Well, just to continue on your Juneteenth narrative, interestingly, what we also don't talk about is that both the Union soldiers and the Confederate soldiers did not want to end slavery.
Right. Or that the Emancipation Proclamation was only applicable to the states in rebellion.
You know, I mean, the Civil War wasn't fought over slavery. But we don't have time for that whole history lesson right now. But I will say that how can Black and non-Black people alike work to combat the threat? We have to commit ourselves to anti-racism.
Say it.
I mean, I'm just going to put a period at the end of that sentence, because I think that in and of itself is a lot of work for people. It's you know, we can do all these things, right? It's easy to do land acknowledgements. It's easy to do solidarity statements. It's easy to do a lot of these things that we do. And we do them because they're easy. We do them them because they're easy.
Yep.
However, it's the hard work we have to do, right? And the hard work here is, you know, because of the way that things are set up, there's a lot of things that we are used to that we should become unused to. Okay. And some of that has to do with being centered, right? When actually that's manufactured, right? Some of it has to do with, you know, we can do land acknowledgements, but can we give land back? You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, if we're really going to go there, let's go there. So,
and the reality is, if it makes you feel good, it's probably not the thing that is anti-racist. And you know you need to do it, right? But like, if it makes you feel good, it's not the thing.
Yeah. I read this story the other day of there's a grandchild who is an heir to like some insane amount of money, like some amount of money that I've like never even heard of in my life. And they just donated a whole grip of it as reparations, right? Like the granddaughter was like, I inherited all this money that was stolen from you.
Yeah.
So let me just give it back. Let me give it back. It's not my money. It's your money. And I don't want to be acknowledged for it. I don't want to, you know, I'm not going to do a bunch of interviews about how I knew it was the right thing to do. I'm just going to do it. And I was like, this is boss business right here. And just imagine, right? We're celebrating Juneteenth and that's awesome. But the United States hasn't actually formally acknowledged slavery.
Right.
So,
right.
So what we can do to combat the threat of amnesia, right, is to steep ourselves in the truth. As hard as it is, as rough as it is, you know, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said something to the effect of, you can only deal with a boil, right, if you expose it to light and air. You cannot cover it. You cannot bandage it and hope that it's going to heal. It won't. It needs air. It needs light. And so does the history and the present of this country. It needs air and light. So that's what we can all do together to help move this process forward.
Oh, I think that is even just your last word being forward. I'm sitting in this conversation. I feel so, like I said, privileged and honored that we were able to spend this hour together. Thank you so much for spending it with me. And we are so excited to just have had you and be a part of the audience here at the International Festival of Arts and Ideas. Liz, let me know where you want to go next for this. Thank you again, Alicia.
All right, thank you, Mercy, Alicia, Chiquia. You are all brilliant, and I am humbled and honored to share the screen with you even for a moment. So thank you for being a part of this, for being a part of this series on imagining into the future. We have what we need to make some real change right now, and I am so excited for everybody who's been watching. Thank you for being a part of the series. You can tell us what you think. We want to know what everybody has to say. I know that the folks who are on the video right now, we are not the only people with ideas. So share them. It's at artidea.org/survey. Tell us your stories. Let us know what you think. And there's going to be music and celebrating out on the green for the rest of the weekend. You can find out all about it at artidea.org. Thank you all and have a beautiful night. Thank you.
Picture me growing freely, no ceiling, no roof. Going deep with no stones to entangle my roots like they do.
Haven, home to iconic landmarks, stellar education, culinary delights, and jazz. Our soul, hip-hop, funk, and rock and roll. Weave through our streets. Are you hungry? Want a bite? Gourmet, soul food fusion, or pizza all night. Thirsty? Grab a bubble tea, a coffee, a shake. Your sweet tooth is going to love our taste. Need a ride here or there? We have trains, planes, and automobiles, bikes, boards, and ramps you can feel. And when you are here, check out our shops. We have quite a lot. Specialty items, crafts and drafts, clothes and hats, books and nooks. All you have to do is look. Feeling adventurous? Check out our lighthouse, beaches, and sails. Get lost and found on our trails. Play a new game of historical fame. No trip to the Elm City is ever the same. New Haven is the greatest small city in America. Our people, our heart. Can't wait to see you and ask, how do you do, New Haven?